there's always been the argument of stocks versus real estate. And historically, stocks have always done better than real estate when you look at the long-term appreciation. And I've always said that when you look at the Forbes list, everyone on that list is essentially there because of their stock holdings, whether it's stock in their own company or stocks in other companies that they've invested in. So as a billionaire, and we talked about this last time, where you are financially, what percentage of your wealth is in stocks versus real estate?
Overwhelmingly high in stocks, but that's just because of how I ended up generating my wealth, which is through companies that I've founded, actually, where I founded, have been CEO, or been in a core founder role that have ended up creating a lot of value. That ends up being disproportionately concentrated, and even a lot of the liquid wealth that I've had is also represented in diversified baskets of different kinds of securities that include stocks, and also once you're at a certain level of needing added diversification, then you look at other kinds of assets as well. So there's some real estate, there's some. I'm in a unique position where most people can actually see what that looks like, because having run for U.S. president, that's actually publicly disclosed. I also think one of the areas where you're going to see more conventional mainstream wealth management wisdom go is to say that you want more uncorrelated assets in a portfolio. So you could have stocks, bonds, you could have different types of even newer assets. You could have uncorrelated assets like, or at least in the future could be uncorrelated assets like exposure to crypto, like exposure to Bitcoin. And I think one of the things you see even in that world, you're going to see an evolution as well. In the Bitcoin world and in the crypto world, you have kind of a maximalist philosophy where it's like, okay, because I like this and then I'm going to go all in. Right. And I'm never going to sell, and I'm only going to be all in and put all of my assets there.
Right.
That ends up becoming a belief system. Versus where I think the world is actually going to go, which is one where you say, all right, there's portfolio theory that says you have diversified holdings of different types of securities. Where does crypto or Bitcoin fit in that? Is that going to be, should that be 100% of your portfolio? Almost certainly not. But could that be for the right person, 1 or 2 or 3% of your portfolio? But for tens of millions of Americans who haven't even thought about that in the past, I think that's going to be one of the developments we see over the next decade as well that I think is going to be pretty interesting.
What percentage of your portfolio is crypto?
I got to do the math right now and look at my exact numbers, but it would be it's a small portion of the total portfolio is the answer.
1%?
And I would say it's probably ends up being less than that because my holdings are so concentrated in the equity of the companies that I have founded, and I tend to actually believe the most in the companies that I've founded, like most founders, and that's one way you actually really generate wealth is creating something of value that didn't exist and holding on to that all the way through the point where it actually appreciates. Even if you take some amounts, of liquidity along the way, as you see founders, do as companies go public and so on. Mm-hmm. In general, the way you generate massive amounts of wealth at the highest level. You talk about Elon with Tesla, you talk about Bill Gates with Microsoft. It is creating something of value and allowing that equity value to compound and appreciate. And so that ends up being a little bit different than people who have made their money through, income through a high earning job that then invests that tends to look a lot more spread out than a guy like me who's been a founder.
Yeah, I've always said that there's no such thing as a middle class. There's just rich and poor. And the difference between those two is that rich people take a significant percentage of their earnings and then invest those earnings, and those earnings start to make money on their own and they compound over time. Poor people, regardless of how much they make per year, spend the money they make and live paycheck to paycheck. Now, someone making $150,000, $200,000 could be poor if they're living a lavish lifestyle and basically living on the edge. So my whole thing is that if you don't invest money and utilize compound interest, you're going to have to work until you die. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I generally agree with that. I would also just add one more dimension because there's two kinds of rich people. And I think that this opens up for the people who are in the poor people bucket to actually be able to have a choice between these two other paths, right? The one kind of rich person is the hired rich person. I mean, these might be CEOs who are making tens of millions of dollars a year, but it's still a hired hand, a very expensive hired hand. Investment bankers, people who work on Wall Street, et cetera. That's one type of rich person. There's the other type of rich person who's in the creator class, which is different than the managerial class. The creator class is somebody who creates equity value by creating something that does not exist in the world. And so I think that takes a lot less financial capital in general, but it takes more ideational capital. And so I think there are a couple of different paths, and not everybody's cut out to be one of those things or the other. But I don't think it's just like one category of rich people. The people in the managerial class are very different than the people who are in the creator class. And I have kind of a unique experience of having lived in both of those worlds, or at least having had enough of a taste of all three categories, right? I grew up in Southwest Ohio as the kid of legal immigrants who came here with no money, legal immigrants, but no money or minimal money. Then I ended up getting a hired for salary job that ended up being, over time, a very high paying job, but it was still a salaried job where you're not the owner. You're not the person who has uncapped upside. You're the guy, if you do a good job, you get a paycheck that's bigger than I would have ever imagined growing up in Cincinnati, Ohio, but it's still a paycheck. And then you have the creator class of actually creating companies, which is what I've been doing in the later phase of my life before I entered politics. That's really was none of the amount of money that I earned over nearly a decade of being the high salaried worker in the hedge fund world. It pales in comparison. It's not, it's a lot of money, more than my parents ever would have imagined anyone in our family making. But it is a pittance compared to what you actually create by creating something that does not exist in the world and owning that equity value. And then there's the tax system that also actually rewards that latter form over the former form too, because that latter form, if you're getting a paycheck, even if it's a really big paycheck, you're paying taxes on that cash year to year, but equity value appreciates without being taxed year on year. That could change.
Yeah,
that could change if Kamala Harris becomes president, because one of the things she wants to do is to implement, and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and a lot of Democrats agree or not. You may agree or not with the policy, but they would say that those people in the creator class or the equity holding class should pay taxes every year on a portion of their equity value. But the problem is that then requires them to sell the shares in the companies they've created even before they otherwise want to sell, which would trigger a cycle of forced selling. That could actually cause a stock market crash.
Yeah.
The irony is the people who are in that category are actually still going to be fine. They're still going to have big houses at the end of it. But the stock market crash is going to hurt the person who has the $10,000 that was investing in that diversified portfolio that you and I talked about. And if you have that tax on unrealized gains, then my answer to your earlier question might actually change, where my answer may not be to put that money in the diversified stock market anymore, if that's going to be something that the government decides they want to crash. So that kind of ties up our whole discussion in one loop right there.
Yeah, I am absolutely terrified. If I got taxed on my stock portfolio before I actually had to sell it, oh my God, I'd probably move out of the country before that happened.
And imagine if it wasn't even your liquid stock portfolio, but now they say this business you're owning and operating or whatever is the government says it has a huge amount of value. You don't even have the cash to pay that tax, but you'll still have to owe it. And so you're going to have to sell something else. When you sell something else, that drives down the price. You got 300 million other people doing the same thing. That's a formula for a crash.
Right.
So I personally think that put the rest of the politics to one side. If you're a single issue voter on the economy, and if your audience, you're telling me is an audience that cares about generating great personal wealth, which I think that you should never have to apologize for. America, you want to live the American dream, you go do it. And I think that's the beauty of this country. That's, I think, one of the dangers that hasn't really been talked about as a hot issue in this election. People talk about every other fringe item. This is right close to the flame for people like you. And I think it's a pretty important issue.
Yeah, I don't see that ever happening. I understand that Kamala.
People say that, but she's proposed this for the last 3 years.
Yes, I know she proposed it, and I think that a certain, a large portion of her audience, her voting audience, is the eat the rich, kind of audience who wants to see rich people, like the Occupy Wall Street types and so forth, wants to see them burn and, lose all their money. But realistically, if you started to tax people's stock portfolios, it would create ultimate chaos, financial chaos. I'm talking about a crash.
It's financial Armageddon.
Yeah, it's financial Armageddon. It will never happen.
This is like the asteroids hitting the dinosaurs level. Okay,
exactly.
That's what this looks like.
I agree with you.
And I know you get that. I know you understand that.
I completely get that. But honestly, I think it's too drastic of a concept for it to ever happen. That's what I think. I
think we're playing with fire. If you're saying that, okay, she's telling you, she's told you for 3 years that this is what she supports. They put it in the budget. She's telling you now she's for it. She was for it in 2020. Put her in office and she's not really going to do it. I don't know. I think you're playing with fire if you care about the amount of money in your bank account. If that's what matters to you, I'd be very careful with that bet. I obviously prefer to go in the other way on this election. But I will tell you this too, is we do have this culture that's hostile to success in the country right now. And I don't think we should make people flog themselves or apologize for their achievements, for generating wealth. I think that's what America was built on. And you shouldn't have to apologize for your success. I want more people to be able to enjoy that success. That's the kind of country we want to create. And you're a great example of that, man. You're an American dream story. I'm proud to say the American dream exists. I know it exists because I've lived it. It's real.
Yeah.
But I want to make that accessible to more people rather than penalizing those who actually succeed in achieving it for themselves.
You called Alex Soros, who's the son of billionaire George Soros, a puppet for hosting Tim Walz.
And can I just pause right there 1 second? Because actually it just ties to our last question. Okay. So you said the Democrats are like, they're against the party of the rich. But then you got this like ultra rich guy who's now, effectively subsidizing the entire Democratic Party. The way I would summarize it is it's like a bunch of rich people telling poor people that it's other rich people that are responsible for their problems while they're actually getting rich while actually preaching them that same message. That's what I see in the modern Democratic Party, actually.
Okay. So why the shot at Alex Soros?
Well, I am disgusted by this across the political spectrum. I called it out from the Republican debate stage too. You'll remember this last year if you were watching closely. I don't like it when billionaires use politicians as their puppets. And anybody who's watching this program right now, just go look at the photographs that Tim Walz posted from his visit with Alex Soros. Just look at the photographs and tell me what you see. What I see, and I think it's clear as day, like if you're literally watching this right now, just if you could actually do it in your feed as this video goes live, post the images of Tim Walz standing next to Alex Soros. It literally looks like there's a puppet master wielding his puppet, and that's exactly the way politics, frankly, has worked for so long in both political parties. But the fact that it's working that way now in the Democratic Party is doubly ironic because they're the ones who supposedly care about blasting the rich. Here's what ends up happening. They only blast the rich, but the rich people who are at the front of the line and controlling the strings carve out exceptions for themselves. So the rules they write don't actually affect them. You don't even talk about this tax on unrealized capital gains. Here's why they're not worried about it. There's going to be a million exceptions that people who are well off are going to be able to pay some accounting firm to be able to engineer around, but it's going to be people like you that are actually going to be the ones who are left holding the bag. So that's what irritates me the heck out of a system where the people we elect to run the government, many cases are just puppets for the people who provide their mother's milk. That's the money needed to fund these political campaigns. And that image of Tim Walz standing next to him, that picture could tell you more than I could say in 1,000 words. Just show it to the audience, and I think that'll tell the story.
I mean, I'm looking at the pictures. It looks like two guys hanging out with each other.
I don't know about that. Let your audience be the judge. I mean, it's symbolic. It'd be one thing if it was just a bad picture, right? But it's another if it actually captures the essence of what's happening, which we know is happening. Is it happening in both parties? I'll be the first to admit it. Of course it is. I said the same thing when I ran on the Republican side last year. But I don't think that Alex Soros's say about climate change policy or about injustice or criminal justice reform or about what even economic policy should be or what our border policy should be should matter any more than anybody else listening to this program. I think as citizens, all of our voices should count equally. And the fact that the system doesn't work that way is, I think, a failure of American democracy. And the irony is Democrats used to criticize this in the past, right? Back in Citizens United in 2010, they say corporations are not people. Well, now they've abandoned that ideology and actually are raising far more concentrated money from mega billionaire donors than even Republicans are. And so I'm not saying that just to dunk on Democrats. It's a systemic change that's required across the political system. But yes, when you have the guy who's, has at least have a 45% chance of being the next vice president, supplicating before a multi-billionaire who rails against other billionaires while actually being one that exploits the system, I think it is something that deserved to be called out. And that's just what I did with the slight joke that I posted saying it looked like you could see the puppet master pulling the strings.